Hey Reddit, what's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? A classmate of mine sent a fake email that looked totally legit to select members of my class saying that we had failed a really important exam which carries bad consequences for our career. After we freaked out, he let us know it was just a joke, and when the results came out a week later there was only one person who failed. My classmate that sent the fake email. Hahaha karma. I wanted my husband to accompany me down to the parking garage in our building to grab something from our car. He was already in his PJ pants and didn't want to come. I convinced him no one would see us, and he reluctantly agreed. We got on the elevator and rode down one floor before it stopped to let someone on. The largest, buffest man steps into the elevator wearing his own PJ pants. He said nothing, but gave my husband the dude head nod before getting off on the main floor and disappearing forever. We've never seen him since. Just your husband's guardian angel. I've mentioned this before on Reddit, so I'll just copy paste, but definitely the shadow dong incident. One night in university I was fooling around with my then GF and noticed that the brightness of the TV caused us to cast distinct shadows on the wall behind us. Being 19 and a fool, I took this opportunity to take a pic, using Snapchat of the shadow my erect penis made on the wall and sent the pic to my best friend. I thought it would elicit an interesting reaction but could not have prepared for what was next. You see, on Snapchat you can see when someone receives your message as well as when it's opened. So as my message is sending, still unopened by him, I receive a Snapchat from my best friend. I open it and lo and behold, what do I see? A shadow dong snap. This man decided at the exact same time that I did to send an identical pic of his dong's shadow on the wall. Both of our GFs were confused, thinking it was some inside joke, when in reality we had never spoken of or sent shadow dongs ever before. TLDR. Decided to snap a pic of my dong's shadow to my best friend at the exact same time he decided to do the same. It's not gay if it's shadows. I was browsing beauty products I've never heard of on the internet, when suddenly out of nowhere my dad, who was in South Korea at the time, FaceTimed me to ask if I wanted the exact same product I was looking at. He was in a Laneige store. When I was in HS I saw the guy from my class in Washington State while on vacation. I wasn't too fond of him so I didn't say anything. 2 days later we were in Canada and I saw him again. We both live in Florida. My favorites occurred during separate canoe trips. The first was during a Labor Day weekend trip up and down the St. Croix River. 2 days paddling upstream, one down, which runs between Wisconsin and Minnesota and eventually joins the Mississippi River. Despite it being a holiday weekend there was virtually no traffic on the river, as we saw only one other boat and that was on the first day shortly after we left. On the second day out, the weather was quite warm. At one point I said, "Boy, a watermelon sure would be good right about now." My 3 companions told me to shut up and not even mention it, because we didn't have one and weren't going to find one in the wilderness. A little while later we spotted a green object floating toward us that turned out to be a watermelon. Years later I was on a river outing with several other people on the Whitewater River in Indiana. I was paddling my kayak and had just told the watermelon story to the people in the canoe next to me. It was a hot summer day, and someone said something to the effect of "watermelons are fine, but I could really go for a cold beer right now." A few minutes later we paddled around a bend and saw a cooler sitting on a sandbar. We stopped on the sandbar, opened the cooler, and found that it contained just enough cold beers for each of us to have one. Appalachian trail hikers refer to occurrences like this as trail magic. I guess it happens on rivers too. Someone somewhere has a story of being unlucky and losing their last watermelon in the river in their cooler with their last 3 beers. For over a decade I very rarely remembered any of my dreams. One night, I had a very vivid dream that I was busted by the cops for drug possession and was sentenced to prison. The dream itself was agonizingly paced as if in real time. Days turned to weeks, to months. The pain of losing everything and everyone in my life had sent me into catatonic despair when all of a sudden, I awoke. I instinctually checked my phone only to find a ton of missed texts, emails, and phone calls from a friend who was arrested for drugs that night while I slept and had been trying to get me to bail him out. I got a new computer and was scrolling through pictures on the old one with my little brother. I had a picture of 2 butterflies, one blue and one yellow, on a large purple flower. I loved this picture and always thought how lucky I was to get it. The colors were so vivid and the butterflies too patient to let me get 3 shots in before they flew away. My brother was in awe of it and I said, "Wow, you really like this one?" He pulled out his phone and said, "No, I took this photo." Sure enough, he had been to the same park the summer after I took my picture. His had the same species of plant and butterflies, in the same park, and around the same area and time of day. What are the chances? This was years ago. I'll have to see if he still has his and I'll try posting them later. The Beagle story. Living in small town Texas at the time, we always took in dog rescues to help find homes for them. It got to the point that people would dump them into our backyard. One day, 4 dogs show up, 2 puppies, a brindle, and a beagle. We immediately get the puppies adopted out because they are young and cute. Fast forward 8 months. We've tried adopting out the beagle male. Twice he's been returned to us. The brindle is an extremely tragic case, and I won't get into her, but she was the mother and the beagle was the father of the puppies. One fine Sunday, I decide that we need to swing by the volunteer animal shelter down the road from our house. It was a Sunday. 3 years I've driven past this place. 3 years I haven't ever been because the owner and I know each other from around town and I do not care for her. And today I wanted to swing by because something about their new cages caught my eye. Why not? It's closed anyways. No one's there. So we get out and look around. I notice there's a green truck parked in the driveway. Shrug it off. This woman comes around the corner and asks us if we work there. Tell her no, but ask what she needs. She's interested in adopting a dog. She's been living in a different town 10 miles away for the last few months and since she was in town today, she wanted to check this shelter. Her dog ran away about 10 months prior. So I tell her we have 2 available for adoption, a brindle and a beagle. She says her dog that ran away was a beagle. At this point it might be exactly what you're thinking. And you're right. Somehow, someway, we'd ended up with her beagle in our yard, and then coincidentally met her on a random day at a location I had never been to but driven past almost every day. The brindle, it turned out, was his girlfriend from next door that would escape with him. Those neighbors had skilled out on their rent shortly before the woman had moved and were not nice people. So, she took the beagle, her beagle who had been missing for almost a year, home. The final coincidence is that we named that beagle Bagel, and his original name, Brownie. Food names. TL. DR. Bought old pants at Goodwill. 10,000 kilometers from home. Appear to come from hometown. Full story. I went on a 3-week trip through Costa Rica 4 years ago. I needed to buy a new pair of shorts since I didn't bring enough. We couldn't find any regular clothing stores. So we ended up in a place where second-hand clothes were sold. They got their clothes from all over the world, wherever people collect clothes for the less fortunate. We call it humanitas over here in the Netherlands. There are collection bin all over the country. I bought an ugly pair of cargo shorts. In one of the pockets, I found a 3-year-old festival token. A festival that takes place is 20 kilometers from my home. I'm sure it wasn't mine, because I never went to that festival. So these pants came all the way from my hometown to Costa Rica, only to be flown back there by me. You should have put your plane ticket in the pocket and put it on the rack at the closest second-hand shop. Basically Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants or something. IDK. Never watched the movie. I was best friends with this girl in preschool. After that we didn't go to the same school so we lost touch. Flash forward to my junior year in high school and I meet this girl. I'm walking her home one day and we pass that preschool. We both realized we went there and figured out that we were the friends back then. We've now been together for 15 years and will finally be getting married in October for our 16th anniversary. Awesome. Congrats my dude. I was about 3 or 4 and my grandpa took me for a walk. Suddenly, I had this very intense feeling of synchronicity. Without thinking I raised my palm in front of me and in that instant bird poo landed right onto it. The strangest part was, I knew that this is going to happen. Can't really describe it, but it was strangely the most perfect moment of my life. BTW. Sorry for my English. Worst superpower ever. Knew a girl in high school that was just the worst type of person. Take too long to explain all the reasons, but a big one is that she tried to drive a wedge between my bestie and I. She moved away after high school. My friend and I would bring her up occasionally and talk about some of her worst qualities and say how glad we were that we never had to see her again. One time, as we were doing so in a restaurant, suddenly she appeared right next to our table. She'd come back to visit someone and just happened to be right where we were right as we were discussing her. So awkward. It was 5 minutes of awkward and then she left and we just sat there like, da fuck. At least she knows now that she's part crap. Met my doppelganger who lived one street from me. In his room there was a symbol on a few drawings which was the same symbol on the leather keyring my sister gave me a few weeks before. He grew up in a city neighboring mine and experienced the same mental health issues. Apparently being too alike is not desirable for a relationship. Copy pasted from another thread, but my whole existence is a strange coincidence. Turned 6 on the 6th of June 2006. I was born at 6:06 p.m. I'm 6 feet 0. And before you ask, no, I don't have 6 fingers on either of my hands. One summer when it was blazing hot, I was leaving Home Depot and there was a guy panhandling at the exit. I gave him an ice cold water out of my lunch cooler and went on to my job. When I got there, the homeowner was like, "It sure is hot today. Would you like a water?" He brings me out the exact same kind of bottled water I just gave away. Stupid, but with all the brands of bottled water there is, it just was like, dang. The universe just gave me my water right back. Last year, I went out to buy myself a cake for my birthday. When I went to the register to pay, I found $20 on the floor. I asked the others in line if any of them had dropped it and no one claimed it. I like to tell people that the universe bought me a cake for my birthday. Me and my best friend in college, right off the bat clicked. Then at odd times our spidey senses kick in and we share the same thoughts while being across the country or even across the pond from each other. The biggest weird out we had was when we both bought cars only to find out we had bought the exact same car, model, year, color, and all. A few years ago, I spontaneously decided I was going to go on a camping trip for a blood moon eclipse by myself. I had zero camping experience, so me deciding to do this was random enough as it was. I asked around for good spots, ended up being suggested one of the small lakes in the Adirondacks, and off I went. The night of the blood moon eclipse, I went to a nearby bridge way before it was even nighttime to make sure I had a good spot. I stayed there the entire night. Lots of people came and stayed, but there was also a lot of people who just pulled over for a minute or two to look at the eclipse, and then just went on their way. Fast forward a couple months, I'm telling one of my longtime friends who I always had a crush on about my adventures when he came home from college. He pauses for a moment and just says, "I know that bridge. Just past the town, over the river." Turns out he had happened to be driving through that night and pulled over at that same exact spot, but he had been on the opposite side of the road. It was freaking crazy. It felt like a really cool fairy tale type thing when we started dating afterwards. But then he turned out to be a psycho, and it just became a waste of a plot point. Lame. Starting college after the army, and when I'm getting my college pic taken, they're doing a story on the new college IDs. 2 days later, my mugshot pic is on the bottom of the front page for their story. 3 years of straight quarters and a couple of major changes. I've tapped out my GI Bill benefits, so I transfer to another school where I have a better shot at getting employment while working. Go through registration and my new school happens to be doing a story on their new ID cards. And guess who gets on the front page of his new school paper? End my 15 milliseconds of fame. But mom was proud. Coincidence, or you're just really attractive, haha. I was at work when my boss's son called and asked if we had an extra Ethernet cable he could have. We didn't. An hour later, a customer walked in and asked, "Do you guys need any Ethernet cables? We had a bunch of extra ones that we can't use at work, and we'll just throw them away unless we can find someone to give them to." I'm from Canada. When I was 20, I went to Australia to travel for 6 months. While I was there, I ran into a couple guys I had went to college with in the same hostel I was staying at. They didn't come with me when I went to the bar that night, but I ended up walking back with 3 other Canadians. While chatting to them I mentioned the other two guys I knew in the hostel by name. Let's call one Cyrus. One guy stops dead and says Cyrus' last name. Turns out, my friend was his childhood best friend he hadn't seen in 12 years. We went and woke him up at 3 AM for a very cool reunion. One night in college I had a dream that my best friend was in trouble and he was calling me for help, but I couldn't reach him in time. The next day I found out he had been killed by an IED in Afghanistan that night. Just happened yesterday. My boyfriend was diagnosed with the same rare 150 000 200 000 Americans health condition I have. Freaky. Or maybe contagious. Had a buddy once in the 1980s who had lost 2 wives to cervical cancer. At the time no one thought that any form of cancer was contagious. Just the thought of it was preposterous. He considered it to be a tragic coincidence. Fast forward a few decades and now we know that he was carrying the HPV. Probably picked it up from his first wife and gave it to his second. I was dating a girl who happened to be Jewish. The family likes to bits my chops about not being Jewish, so I mentioned an obscure Jewish sounding surname from my grandmother's side. Her and her mother went pale. TLDR. I probably banged my cousin. Absolutely not kosher. I have to. 20 years ago my family and I lived in Germany. My folks and sister lived there about 12 years prior before I was born. One day my mom, sis, and I are walking in an open marketplace and my mom says, I wonder what happened to Mrs. Ziz, you know that lady who babysat you, sister, when you were a baby. Not 10 minutes later my mom stops a random woman in the market and says, excuse me, are you Mrs. Ziz? Yup. Hadn't seen her in over a decade. Happened to find her right after saying her name. The other one just happened this week. I'm a teacher and usually have music playing in the classroom as kids walk in. I have Smooth Criminal by MJ playing, and a kid walks in saying, whoa, this is the same song my iPod played as my alarm this morning. Less than a minute later, different kid walks in. Whoa, this is the same song my Sonos played as my alarm this morning. Of all the songs possible, me, Apple, and Sonos chose the same one on the exact same day. When I was a kid, someone in my family broke a glass vase on the wood floor. My mom cleaned it up as best she could but wanted us to wear shoes in the kitchen for a few days just in case she'd missed some, and she continued sweeping to try and get the last little bits. I was loudly complaining about the injustice of having to wear shoes in my own house when I stepped on that final piece of glass. Final piece that you know of, don't be taking those shoes off just yet. A few years back while I was working in a little pub, a couple of 2-seater tables next to one another were finishing up at the same time. I got them both their checks, and both parties decided to split their bill. Upon trying to close them out, I realized that not only were the amounts split identically down to the cent, but each table had matching sets of cards, at least by the final 4 digits. That is, Table 1 had a charge of 28.79 on card ending 1000 and another for 28.78 on card ending 5008. Table 2's charges were identical, down to the cent and last 4 digits on both cards. I've never gotten over how unrealistically improbable it all was. I was on holiday in South Africa and I met someone who lived just round the corner from me, in the UK. Another time I was on a ferry to France and I saw one of my teachers. You're not helping the American stereotype that all Brits know each other here. Anyway, I'll see you later. Got to go see the Queen. It's been a couple of weeks. How I met my husband. So you know how they say you won't find someone until you stop looking. On the way to the club with my cousin I said I don't want to look for a guy tonight. I just wanted to have fun. I had a bout of bad luck in that department. Anyways, we are dancing, hanging out, we go outside and I go have a smoke. I remember I was talking to a guy friend. I was looking around and then I saw him. He was standing by a guy who I knew was friends with my cousin. I don't know how to explain it, but it was I have to go talk to him. I never went and talked to guys because I was too shy and had a crap ton of insecurities. Anyways, my friend was in mid-sentence. I don't think I even looked at him and told him something like a hug. I got to go. So I go over there and say, hi, you look bored. At first he give me a who is talking to me kinda look, like I was being annoying or something. It was just a glance my way. He does a double take and the biggest smile lights up his face. The weird part, apparently he had seen me first. His friend thought he knew me. He did, but not in the way he thought. The whole reason he was outside was to get introduced to me. So very surprising when I came up to him first. We got together 2 weeks later and have been together ever since. When I started hanging out with my girlfriend, she invited me over to her house. And it's the first house I ever lived in. Her grandmother, who lives down the street, was friends with my parents. She worked for a doctor, who delivered me. Fast forward a little bit. We're sitting around looking at some of her old family pictures and there's this one of a 4th of July parade in my neighborhood. There was a little boy in the picture that they didn't really know who it is, but it looked an awful lot like me. I asked my dad and he remembers that day where he took us to our old street to watch the parade. When I was a toddler, I had wandered into my future girlfriend's family picture. I have to. So first off, I met my oldest current friend when we were 14. When we were 17, we discovered we were born 3 hours apart. I demanded to see it because I thought someone was playing a joke on me. Seriously, I made my friend show it to prove it. Took us 3 years to figure that out. Secondly, I ran into my cousin in California at an airport. Neither of us were flying home. We hadn't even spoken in weeks. But we had layovers at the same time at terminals that were right next to one another in a different state. It was so freaking weird. We took a picture to prove it happened. I had 2 friends in college that didn't know each other until I introduced them. They found out that they had been born about 5 minutes apart in the same hospital, in the rooms next to each other. Their social security numbers are 1 number apart. When I was a kid, we had this plush penguin that would play jingle bells if you squeezed its stomach. One Christmas, it got broken so that it just kept playing the song endlessly. This went on for hours. My mom tried stuffing it in the couch cushion, but we could still hear it. Finally, I got super annoyed, grabbed the penguin, and said, "This is really annoying. Could you please stop?" It stopped immediately. First grade, my parents sold the house and we moved about an hour away. Said goodbye to all my classmates and all that. A month after we moved, the kid I sat next to in my old school moved in across the street. A few years back, my dad went on a trip to Denmark for a business trip. My mom, being Danish, decided that she was going to come along. She had always heard stories about the side of the family that never moved to America, but she had no idea where they lived or if any of them were still around. Anyway, after a week in the country, my mom and dad are driving down a country road when their car got a flat. There wasn't really any cell reception, so they actually wound up walking up a driveway a bit to ask the locals to use their phone. They walk up the steps of this little cottage, knock on the door, and an elderly woman came to the door. Her eyes lit up, fixed on my mom, and wound up giving her a hug. My parents were understandably confused as the old woman's husband was also excited to see my mom. The couple didn't really speak any English, but they led my parents down the main hallway to their guest room. There, on the dresser, was a photo of my mom and her brothers from their high school graduation. The old couple were my mother's great aunt and uncle, the ones that never came to the USA. To this day, my parents still can't explain it. When I was a baby, I was given up for adoption by my mother. She had a 10-year-old son and was going through a very rough patch in her life. Fast forward 20 years, I'm a junior in college. I'd never known anything about my birth family except for the first names of my brother and mother. Never even seen a picture of them. Anyway, my adoptive mom bought me an ancestry DNA test kit for Christmas. When I got my results back, my number 1 match was this guy named Vincent. I looked him up on Facebook and thought, dang, this guy looks like me. I sent him a message explaining everything and he instantly knew that I was his brother. This isn't the coincidental part. After talking for a bit through Messenger, we realized we only live 10 minutes apart. We decided to meet that night and reconnect. Turns out, we both attend the same university, have the same major and minor. He decided to go back to school and finish his degree 10 years later and happened to choose my university. All this time we thought we were across the country from each other. Really makes one think about nature v. nurture. We have a great relationship now and it's amazing to have an older brother. Also, I found out I have a younger brother on my mother's side and another older brother on my biological father's side. Oh man, I to this day am amazed by this. I was in the process of moving to France for school and needed to get a visa from the consultant in Chicago, 6 hours from my hometown. So I go there and my dad drops me off at the building. However, during the appointment I realize I had forgotten a piece of paperwork. Now, the woman working says I'll leave to go get it, that I'll have to reschedule the entire appointment, but if my dad brings it up that's fine. So I go to call him and at that moment I realize my phone has completely stopped working. Like, dead as dead can get. So I sheepishly ask a girl about my age sitting in the lobby if I can use hers. She says yes, and to my surprise, her case is logo for my university. Turns out we go to the same school and she's getting a visa for another city in France. I thank her, talk to her about some professors, and then my dad shows up and I finish my appointment. But here's where crap gets insane. 1 year later I'm moving back home from France. I had bought a business class seat because wow, air freaking sucks for long flights otherwise. I notice a girl looking very puzzled at me 2 rows behind me and she looks very familiar. Everyone gets off the plane and she comes up to me and asks if I remember her. Then it hit me. It was the same girl from the consulate. She had extended her stay in France. We both have a good laugh about the odds of that happening. TLDR. Ran into a girl from my college twice under the strangest of circumstances. I was planning on ending my life. Then someone made a post somewhere about giving free Steam games. I clicked on it to see what it's about and saw their profile having a in memory of then another user's profile. Their friend's profile who died 10 years ago. Then I go to their profile and see all their friends constantly posting on their profile every year on their birthday or Thanksgiving or Christmas everything. They made sure to remember him, and at that moment I realized that I also probably have people like that who'd be so sad if I am gone, and it made me think of things differently. When I was younger, 8-9 years old, my family and I were at a water park on vacation nowhere near where we lived. As we were walking around the park we found a pair of sisters that were wearing the exact same swimsuits as me and my sister. The girls were the same ages as my sister and I as well. I always thought it was crazy. While traveling solo in Asia, I went to a remote Buddhist temple and bumped into someone I knew from my hometown. Unbelievable. Of all the places in time and people on this earth, I meet a girl I know from home. About 20 years ago, I was taking the Amtrak from Baltimore to New York. I was reading some kind of thriller novel, and about 5 minutes after I read about the protagonist casually noticing the giant whale mural on the side of a building in Wilmington, Delaware. I glanced out the window just as we were passing that same mural. Not an exciting story, but it was complete coincidence. My mom and I went to NYC for a week one summer when I was in high school. We lived in CA. Her youngest cousin, also from CA, was a PhD student at NYU at the time, but we didn't tell him we were in town because she had work. He might be busy, etc. On our way somewhere we took the 6 train the wrong direction and realized after 2 stops and got off somewhere in Midtown to switch sides. Lo and behold, there is her cousin standing on the platform looking at us in disbelief and saying hi. My mom's nickname. He was going somewhere out of his ordinary routine and we should never have been at that stop. It was awesome and we all saw Avenue Q the next night together. I have to. First was in Mexico when I was 16. At the resort, there is a spot to paint pottery and I was there as my dad who was sitting across from me. Next to us was another father and his daughter. They were both from our hometown. I asked the daughter what high school she went to and it turned out to be the high school my recent ex went to. It turns out she did. She is his girlfriend. It was crazy and we both thought it was so cool. Meanwhile our dads are finding it so strange and we're confused why an ex and a current girlfriend were excited to meet each other. The second coincidence was at my work. One of my coworkers was my same age and it turns out his birthday was 2 days before mine. I asked him where he was born. He was born at a military hospital in Oklahoma, the hospital I was born at. We were both in the same hospital, the same nursery, just feet away from each other. It was one of the coolest moments in my life. My mom and I went to England in 2016 for the first time. We were on the top tier of a double-decker bus. I was sitting in the back. Mom was sitting in the front. She struck up a conversation with the lady in the next seat. Turns out she taught at my high school in NC. I never had her. I was a band person. She taught home ec, so her class was never available to me, but she was there while I was. She now has her own tour company. Next day we were standing in line at the Tower of London. Mum strikes up a conversation with the Americans in front of us. Turns out they also lived in our small town for a while. Elizabeth City, and his son, also with him, went to Sheep Honey Elementary, where my youngest sister went. He would not have been there when she was. Small world. Not me, but I was there when it happened. My best friend and I were visiting Australia for the first time. We were in a park. He saw an attractive woman, and he went up and introduced himself to her. Turns out they both lived about a mile from each other in Northern Virginia and ended up dating for a few months. I started playing Pokemon Platinum for the first time in 10 years. Right off the bat, I find a shiny Pokemon, Shinx. That is a 1 in 8,192 chance. The very next route, I found another shiny. This time it was a Stully. Years and years of shiny hunting. I've only found one wild Pokemon at the full 1.8192 rate. 10 years later, I find 2 in a row. I wonder what the odds are? If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.